Welcome to the Love Mondays podcast, where we explore how people create more purpose, more passion, and fulfillment in their work and lives. Today's guest is someone whose leadership journey is truly extraordinary. Robert Cujo Teschner spent more than 2 decades as a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, flying the F15 and F22, serving as an instructor in the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, and ultimately commanding an operational F-22 squadron. Throughout his career, Cujo learned that high-performing teams aren't built on perfection. They're built on trust, accountability, and the willingness to learn from every experience. These lessons became the foundation of his best-selling book, Debrief to Win, which has helped leaders around the world create cultures where people continuously improve without fear of blame. Since retiring from the military, Cujo has worked with organizations across industries, helping leaders transform the way they communicate, build trust, and lead teams through one of the most powerful practices in aviation, the debrief. What I love about Cujo's message is that while the stories come from the cockpit, the lessons apply to every workplace. Whether you're leading a business, coaching a team, or simply striving to become a better leader, his practical approach to accountability, learning, and continuous improvement will leave you with ideas you can put into action immediately. Wow, that was a mouthful. Cujo, welcome to the Love Mondays podcast.
It's fantastic to be here. Thank you so much, my friend, for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this ever since we met back in Ohio.
Amazing. I always start with the same question, and today is a Monday. Do you love Mondays?
I do. I really do. I'll explain a little bit more about what that means truly, because I know that it's not all rainbows and unicorns and daisies and happy times, all this, but I 100% do.
Amazing. Tell me more.
Yeah. Look, I'm one of the people, like, as an ex-military person, especially here in the United States, we have, I guess, learned over time to thank those who have served. And it's a regular thing to open with, thank you for your service. I didn't do that in the Vietnam era. And I think it's the Vietnam era that taught us that that's probably something good to do. And so folks routinely say thanks for your service. And I have a hard time sometimes accepting that, because in my previous life, I got to do what I always wanted to do. And ever since I walked out of the movie theater, having seen Star Wars, I wanted to be our planet's Luke Skywalker. I wanted to fly whatever the X-Wing equivalent was on planet Earth. And I got that chance. And so in the previous life, I for sure loved Mondays because it meant coming into work and getting a chance to live my dream. I did that for as long as I could. There was a tipping point into, hey, I had to leave that line of work and get into a new one. But what I found is that I love this line of work just as much as, and in some ways more than, the previous one. And I'm so grateful for every day when I get to do this. And every week as a new week unfolds, I'm just so happy that I'm here on a number of different levels, and happy to go wherever that takes us, Ron, as we dig deeper into this. But I do truly love Mondays.
Yeah, amazing. And I mean, gratitude really comes out very clearly from you. And then I'd love to go that a little deeper on that, right? So you're now flying these supersonic jets, and now you're speaking to corporate audiences, to businesses. Like, tell me, like, how did you find joy in this second career? Like, what are the things you did to get there?
Yeah, well, I think it goes to, how did the second career erupt? And there's two components to it. There's two phases to it. One was a long time ago, when I was an instructor at the U.S. Air Force Weapons School. The idea occurred to me that what we were doing there was probably applicable everywhere. The fact that we were equipping practitioners, leaders, with the frameworks and the skill sets necessary to allow them to lead effectively in a really demanding environment, and that we were teaching the same frameworks over and over again, that we were equipping everybody with the same basic principles and frameworks. I thought that was something that probably could be done elsewhere, and probably needed to be done in the business space. And so I knew that someday I would test that out and see if maybe I could bring that into the business space. Second component was colorectal cancer, which I unfortunately got about a decade after having the idea that what we were teaching at the Fighter Weapons School might be relevant in the business space. And so that was an accelerant that caused me to leave the Air Force sooner than I expected to, and be in a position to test out this theory earlier than I thought that I was going to be able to. And that led to me doing what it is that I'm doing today. It just so happens, if we fast forward to the end, that the idea that I came up with back when I was a young captain was true. The principles that allow us to team effectively seem to be universally applicable. And so bringing those things into the world of business has been fantastic. There's actually a third component, and I think it ties to the previous life being very high risk, high reward. It's a dangerous profession. Every day we went out there and practiced in our training. We knew you might not come home alive from this. And not to sound overly dramatic, but it is the truth. We did really aggressive stuff up there. We pushed our bodies beyond kind of where they were designed and engineered to play at successfully. Pulling 9 times the force of gravity is painful. And we would maintain that for, long periods of time, and we'd fly fast and really close. And so very, very high risk. The reward was, if you could do that well and come back successfully, it was incredibly satisfying. Entrepreneurship is very similar. It's a risky proposition to go out and take an idea into the world and to try to convince somebody else to pay you to provide it. It's very rewarding when you convince somebody to pay you to provide the service, in our case, and it is the transformation that they were looking for, and you get to be part of that whole thing. And so I appreciate the fact that you and I get to be fighter pilots in this phase of our careers, even without touching an airplane, even without going to 9 times the force of gravity or flying really, really fast. And that's a great place to be, I think.
Yeah, amazing. I love how you talk about that in the entrepreneurship space. And I actually just finished talking to a person who's leaving corporate to start her business. Name's Tanya. And she was asking me for all the advice over the last 5 years, where it's hard, as you said, but so rewarding if you stick with it. Okay, before we get a little deeper into it, I'd love you to talk a little bit more about your health scare and how you got through that.
Yeah, good. So one of the things that I've noticed in the years that I've been out there speaking, teaching, is that when I talk about the flying side of the work, I distance myself usually from the audience. I mean, the things that we used to do in the fighter business, they're different. I mean, we see it in the film. You're like, wow, watch Top Gun or something, and even as I sit there and watch those things, I'm like, how do you do that? I used to do it, but it's different when you're sitting there and watching it. So there's a distance, a gulf that can be created. The place where I come back and rejoin everybody is in the shared understanding that all of us are human, and in dealing with our humanness, oftentimes we face adversity, and probably one of the biggest pieces of adversity that I ever came across was waking up from a colonoscopy in downtown Stuttgart, Germany, where I had gone in for just a quick assessment. I had some symptoms that didn't seem right, to a German doctor who had a tear in his eye as he shares with my wife and yours truly that he found a tumor growing in my lower colon, one that he suspected had been growing for a decade, he told us.
Wow.
That it would take 5 days to get the biopsy results back. And if there's anything that he could do for us in the meantime, to please let him know. And I was still groggy, from having been out for the procedure, blessedly. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, I got something you could do, like get rid of the tumor. How about you do that between now and 5 days from now? We call it good. But we knew in that moment that everything had changed in an instant. Like, if we could make it through this thing, whatever it's going to take to do so is probably going to prevent me from doing what it was that I love doing, which is flying high performance fighter aircraft that can get to 9 times the force of gravity. And sure enough, when I asked the surgeon who we eventually worked with what it would look like to fly F-22s again, he said, I would not recommend it. He said, Mr. Teschner, you'll rip apart from the inside at 9 times the force of gravity, which I thought was not very cool. That's a horrible way to go. And so, in other words, in very short order, I knew that my career was done. At least the flying side of things was over. And that was a pretty tough pill to swallow, because it comes kind of out of nowhere. Like, we hoped to go in there, find out that everything's fine, get back onto it. I was really fit, really trim, really healthy at the time. So we thought, it's probably a nothing burger and we can move on. And all of a sudden, we're just trying to figure out how to prolong life, how to make it through this phase, what kind of surgery we're going to have to do, how we're going to do this with a wife that was 5 months pregnant with our 4th child at the time of this diagnosis. Like, it went from great to you got to be kidding me to all right, we got to fight our way through this. And what was really interesting about that journey, Ron, was that my wife and I early on decided, just from an overall mindset standpoint, that we were going to win this. Like, we together, within minutes of the diagnosis, came to the conclusion that whatever it is that we have control over, and it's not everything for sure. In fact, it's very little that we actually can control here. But mindset-wise, attitude-wise, we're going to come into this thing saying, we're going to give this fight our all. We're going to come through this victoriously. And when we do, we're going to have a heck of a story to tell. Not because we wanted to tell a story, but we wanted that mindset of, man, if we could overcome this adversity, how good could that be? And how could we fully serve others by sharing it? And fast forward, 12 plus years later, I'm here with you sharing components of the story, which is a really, really amazing thing and a gift that keeps on giving. Another reason why on so many levels. And I told you there was multiple levels here. I love Mondays.
Amazing. And, tell me a little bit more about that decision you and your wife made, like, we're going to win. And what are some things you did on a daily basis to keep that kind of positive spirit going?
Yeah. So it started with, as soon as we get this diagnosis, it felt like a tidal wave had hit the two of us. And there was really nothing else to discuss with the doc. We had to wait 5 days to get the biopsy results back to figure out just how bad things were. And so, what do you do in that moment? And in our case, what we did is we went to lunch, and neither of us can remember all of the specifics because it's very, very foggy. Okay. So as best we can collectively recollect, it's about 3:00 in the afternoon. And we went to lunch because I was starving. And for anybody that's had a colonoscopy, you know how hungry you are post-procedure. And I did not want to die hungry. And so I was going to go to lunch regardless of how bad things were. And she was very pregnant and she was always hungry. So it just made sense. So we go downstairs to the bottom floor of this place in downtown Stuttgart, and there's a cafe there. And I remember it being completely empty. Nobody's having lunch at 3:00 in the afternoon. So we get a booth. There's nobody around us. We place our orders. The server goes away, and it's just the two of us. And the first thing that came to my mind that I shared with my wife was, our story just got better. I just told her, I said, and I don't remember if I said Diane or if I said honey or whatever, but I just remember the core message was, I just need you to know our story just got better. And she agreed with me, which was really fascinating because at that moment in time, there was nothing suggestive of our story getting better in that instant. So where did that come from? And I remember thinking, in the business of being a fighter pilot, what we're used to is that things typically don't go exactly according to plan. We have great plans. We have all these things that we're stepping out the door that we're confident are going to allow us to achieve victory, but the enemy gets a vote. And we say in the military, all militaries have the same basic statement: no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And how you deal with the enemy's disruption really matters. And how a team navigates disruption truly matters. And that's one of the things that I was privileged to learn, was how to navigate disruption well. And for all fighter forces, I think the kind of prevailing attitude is, when disruption hits, which it always will, we're always going to find a way to win. And when we do, the story that we're going to be able to tell on the backside, and we get together every week and Friday roll call for the U.S. military in the squadron bar on a Friday afternoon. It's where we share these stories of how we overcame adversity. The story that you tell when you overcame the worst of adversity is so much better than if you just say, yeah, everything went according to plan. So it was an attitude that kind of unleashes itself. And I just kind of shared with my wife in that moment, that she immediately embraced, and that sets us up to go, hey, again, we don't control most of the things here. If we find out it's stage 17 cancer, there's not much we can do there, probably. But mindset-wise, attitude-wise, we're going to come into this knowing that whatever we can control, we're going to control for good. The other piece that immediately kicks in is us embracing humor. And I think if my wife were here, she would testify to the fact that we've probably never laughed more than in our worst state. And when I say worst state, colorectal cancer can be a very invasive thing to explore. And I went through I still have some PTSD associated with just the treatment, the diagnosis and treatment phase of this whole journey. And there's horrible things that I had to experience. And the only way that I knew to explain it to her was by way of laughter and joking our way through it. And she did the same. And by laughing through some of the worst things, it
Mm.
made it tolerable. Oh, and what a great thing that was. And I don't know where that came from, other than it was a necessary survival mechanism. And I don't know that we've laughed as much since. I'm glad that we aren't laughing. In fact, I'm glad that we aren't laughing as much because it means we're not going through another phase of that right now. So that's a good thing, and net positive. But what a great way to survive that through. And both of us really look back on those days fondly because of it.
Yeah, thank you for being so open and sharing, right? Because we all go through lots of different difficult chapters in our lives, and I think the attitude and humor, which you wouldn't necessarily naturally come to, is I really appreciate you sharing that. Okay, I'm gonna shift gears now. So Cujo, so I'm in Toronto, and there's another famous Cujo. Tell me how you got your nickname Cujo.
Yeah, U.S. Air Force fighter squadrons all have their own different ways of conferring a call sign. In our tribe, in the F15 world that I grew up in, the naming ceremony was a really big deal, and it takes place about, call it, 2.5 years into your journey into aviation. And in those 2.5 years, you got 13 months of pilot training. You've spent 3 months learning how to unlearn pilot training and learn how to abuse an aircraft. In what we call Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals. You spend 6 months learning whatever the fighter is that you're going to be flying for your first assignment, and then you get to your first operational assignment, and you spend 6 months becoming qualified as a wingman. And that entire time, you're a nobody. You have no name, the temporary call signs. You might be known as freaking new guy. So you have to get to the point where you've demonstrated you're going to hang out, you're going to stick around, and the tribe then makes you fully vested in one of their own. And the way that it worked in my F-15 squadron, and I was named in a squadron in Florida, was I got tapped on the shoulder on a Tuesday afternoon. Hey, Cujo, make sure that you're at roll call on Friday, though I wasn't Cujo at the time. And that Friday was my naming ceremony. And it was a amazing experience where the entire tribe got together, plus special guests, the leadership for our, what we call a wing, multiple squadrons. It was a packed house. And stories were told that night about me that had to be at least 10% true. And that was the threshold, 10% true. And there was some adult beverages involved in the whole thing. And what I found was that if I could behave appropriately through that probably the night would end well. In other words, every time that I was given the opportunity to weigh in on a story that was told about me or offer a counter to some egregious thing that had been said about me, if I could just learn to zip it and maybe just do a toast to the squadron, that things would go well. So that's what I did. I did all night long. I've been there where whoever it is that we're naming chooses to try to influence, chooses to speak when given the opportunity to do so, and it never goes well. So anyway, long story short, I did not offer any inputs, and all night long stories were told. Eventually they connected potential call signs to those stories. They had it on a big chalkboard. They eventually whittled it down to 2. They asked me which I preferred. I had enough sense remaining to not give an opinion and to once again do a toast to the squadron. And in a thing that started around 4:58 in the afternoon on a Friday and ended, nobody's really sure exactly when, about 2:00 in the morning, I stumbled out of there as Cujo. And why they named me Cujo, I cannot share. It has to remain somewhat classified. That's to protect the semi-innocent. But I tell you, as a young guy who's living his dream, one of the coolest things that ever happened to me was to have a bunch of people that I respected, that I looked up to, that I admired, my heroes, confer upon me a name that I would be known for or with for the rest of my life, which essentially said, you're now one of us for life. And that was such a meaningful transition that to this day, and as we record this, a 52-year-old adult male, and I still prefer to be known as Cujo over any other of the names that I've been given in my life. And there's something to that. And as I came into work on Monday, people no longer called me FNG. They called me Cujo. And in the first debrief that I attended as Cujo, a group of people that previously had been a little bit dismissive of me, hey, you're still learning, just zip it and learn what we have to teach you, they throw open the door to, hey, Cujo, what do you think about this?
Amazing.
It was totally transformative. It was so amazing. When done correctly, that's such a powerful experience. And so I appreciate you asking. I think there's something to that when you're talking about elements that bond people together, build trust, create high performance. That for sure, for us in fighter aviation, seems to be one of the elements. And when it's done correctly, it works exceptionally well.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. And it's something I've noticed because I'm a big sports fan. And I noticed some of the high performing teams like the Blue Jays of last year, they have nicknames for everybody. I think it's different but similar, right? You're just a
Right.
part of like this inside group of people, and you're welcome to the team. So absolutely love that.
Because think about this, because there is a divide. Like there's the external world,
Yes.
and the external world is doing its thing, but then there's us in our part of this world, and in our case, I mean, the Blue Jays, great example. They're trying to navigate a 162 game season. They're competing against a bunch of top performers in their class constantly. It's an exhausting experience. You start out fresh, you end up hurt. You're playing through hurt and injury. Like, how do you maintain that same zeal and gusto that
Yes.
takes out others? And I think part of it is to identify we are different from that external world. And here we know each other as follows. And it creates that. It creates those special bonds. If it's done correctly, it creates those special bonds that sort of elevates things. And in a fighter squadron, it I'd say most of the time serves to create those special bonds that elevate performance. And you need that when you're going into harm's way. And in the fighter business, we didn't even know each other's first names. Like, I mean, you and I could have been in combat situations for years on end. I'd never know you as Ron. I'd know you as your call sign and vice versa. And if somebody asked you if you'd ever flown with, Rob Teschner, you'd be like,
Who is that guy?
that last name sounds familiar. I had never heard of Rob.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. So you lived what many people would consider a dream career. Top Gun instructor and an F-22 squadron commander. What did that teach you about people and loving the work you did?
Yeah, look, a couple of things. One, what I found was, and I had to learn this the hard way, a team is a team is a team. And the principles that allow us to team effectively are universally applicable. I think in the fighter space, what we learned is that you can gel a bunch of people with disparate backgrounds together and have them be willing, actually volunteer to go forth into harm's way with no guarantee of being able to come home, not by paying them more or by incentivizing them with sort of semi-fraudulent external devices, but rather just by sharing a compelling purpose with them and convincing them that the work that we're doing is worth doing. And there's something really cool about that can be shared elsewhere. So that was one of the big revelations that I had to catch up with over time, but that has served me very well since. The other thing that I found was that I was blessed early on in life to have been able to have figured out kind of what my purpose was for the first part of my life. And I go back to, and I really thank George Lucas for this, telling that story of this guy on some, deserted planet in the middle of nowhere, Tatooine, who has this ambition of going and exploring the cosmos and is trying to get away from his Uncle Owen and eventually finds a way into it, happens into it, and gets a chance to go fly, fight, and win. That did something to me. It stirred something within me. And so thank you, Mr. Lucas, for stirring that within me and for everybody along the way that allowed me to get to go live that. There is something about identifying who you are, what you're supposed to be doing, and then doing it that can be incredibly compelling. And I've been blessed to be able to do that twice.
Amazing. And just building on that. So maybe people who haven't found that purpose, like what advice would you give them to maybe try and uncover something that gives them as much joy as I'm seeing from you?
Yeah, well, I think, and this is where I am so grateful because it was sort of done for me. I didn't go out there looking for it. It just happened. 1977, this movie comes out. I get a chance to see it as a young kid. I walk out of there blown away, and I really never deviated from this is what I want to do. Okay, so something about that resonated with who I was, and I didn't do anything that set me up to be a good fighter pilot growing up. I was a classically trained violin and piano player, for crying out loud. Like there was nothing about that really you think, oh, that's going to make you the next Maverick. But deep inside of my soul, I knew that this was going to be. I wonder, when that isn't just done for you, how many people are intentionally trying to figure that out? And what I took from you was that it may have taken some external influences to cause you to be intentional about figuring that out. And now you've made it your life's work to help others to do so. I wonder how many people are just kind of floating through for whatever reason. They found this avenue and they're now doing this thing, and it checks most of the boxes, but it isn't that thing that's fueling their passion. And so if that isn't organically happening, we probably need to be very intentional about figuring that out. There's a reason why Cynic was so successful with his start with this golden circle, and start with why, and the whole YouTube phenomenon. That intentionality is a really big deal. And by the way, let's just agree to this: if you do figure out where you're supposed to be and what it is that you're passionate about and get a chance to do it, doesn't mean that you're always going to be able to. And so there are going to be intervals throughout life where we have to re-figure that out in this new version of ourselves, which is so important as well. And that intentionality is critical.
Yeah, I love that. And, even as I think about your attitude, I mean, you're a famous guy and you're so humble to me at that dinner that we ended up sharing the table with Mr. Mionsky. And you always had this like attitude. And I think even you talked about with your health journey, the attitude of I'm going to be grateful and I'm going to win and I'm going to make it something I'm joyful about. So it's such a nuanced thing around finding what you love to do, but also bringing the right attitude. And there's a book I'm reading right now by Jim Collins called What to Make of a Life. And he talks about we all are encoded to do something. That's the word he uses. And it's a search, but people who have found that, it's the joy of doing, right? Not just the 1%, the thing people see, but the 99.9%, which is pretty cool. Okay, amazing. So I'm not sure if your favorite movie is Star Wars or Top Gun. Which one is it?
It does kind of depend on the day. When I'm talking with my 9-year-old, it kind of gravitates back towards Star Wars. But then I do admit that both of those Top Gun movies are exceptional. I think the second one's actually better than the first in a lot of ways. So it depends on when you ask me the question.
Amazing. Okay, so you told an amazing story about a near accident that you were part of. And then you helped explain how you debriefed it. So I'd love you to kind of share that story and maybe transition into your book, Debrief to Win.
Yeah, good. So one of the things that I decided when I made the decision to come into this space and to start bringing some of the high performance team principles that I lived into existence in business was I figured I would start with the accountability mechanism that we use in the United States Air Force, specifically, one that I was responsible for teaching at the Fighter Weapons School, and I was an instructor there, only because it was such a different view of accountability than what I've seen anywhere else. And so of all the things to lead with, one might argue accountability is probably the least sexy because there's so much negativity, baked around it. Most people's experience with accountability is I fear it to some degree. I want to avoid accountability because it usually follows a failure and it leads to some version of blame, shame, punishment. It's always been that way. And so when I get the chance to share, I oftentimes share a story where I got a chance to fly a mission one time. It was a dogfight profile where we start 5 miles apart from each other. And in the course of this mission, we get a chance to scream towards one another, pass each other at a very high rate of speed, and then engage in 9G maneuvers, pulling 9 times the force of gravity until somebody's in a position to shoot the other one with simulated ordnance. And then at the point where there's a clear victor and a clear loser, we rinse and repeat until we run out of gas. Super fun, really high octane, high energy, dangerous thing that we do. And the very short story on this thing is that as we set up, everything was good. As we executed the mission, every time that I tried to take a little check to a little turn so that we could get some safe separation so we could have a safe pass, my opponent matched me and he took away the safe separation. And it came down to, at the very last second, instead of pulling against the force of gravity, I'll push, he'll pull. We'll have this close pass where time slowed down so much because of how close that we died that I could see each individual screw on the bottom of his aircraft. And I had enough time to count hundreds of them as he was screaming past my airplane at 1,000 miles an hour. We were so close to death that this whole experience lasted minutes. I'm seeing screws. I'm worried about him shaving off the vertical tails of my airplane. I'm worried about melting as his engines go past my canopy. I'm amazed at the beautiful sight that I see as his afterburners are bouncing off my canopy. It was just a stunning experience. And you'd think if you came really, really close to dying, that the accountability process would be a really painful experience. You'd probably guess that there'd be some screaming, there'd be some choice words used, there'd be some hurt feelings. It would probably last a long time. And what's amazing about it, given the version of accountability that we practice there, and when I say we, I'm talking fighter forces across the NATO alliance that we practice all over, it's none of that. We have a framework that we unleash. It's the same framework regardless of outcome. If we win, we're gonna follow the exact same steps as if we lose. We go into this thing knowing that the only demand is absolute vulnerability and the full truth. That's it. Everything else, whatever. But the only thing that we're being measured is against how much vulnerability we're bringing to the table and whether or not we're able to reveal the full truth, which is necessary for learning. And so in this case, coaching my teammate through a really challenging circumstance, I, as the leader of this formation, was able to ask two really important questions. One, what was your game plan? And two, where did safety factor into it? And get wonderful answers from my teammate, which included, hey, my game plan was to copy everything that you did, and safety was out the window. I was so focused on executing my game plan that I forgot the basics. That we were able to, in about 4 minutes, identify the root cause of this near catastrophe and develop confidence that we would come out of this thing never making that mistake again. Either he or I, never making this mistake again, and being able to fly with confidence the next day, knowing that we're going to be good to go. And if you just think about it, that's pretty remarkable, kind of astounding that you could so efficiently, so effectively get to the root cause of a major issue and walk out of there feeling pretty good about the prospects of the future. And that one stands out in my mind as one of the neatest experiences of my flying career because it served its purpose. Neither of us ever made that mistake again. And furthermore, we shared that mistake with the entirety of our squadron a few days later when we all got together for roll call. My opponent told the story of how this thing unfolded to us that Tuesday on Friday afternoon so that everybody else could also learn from this experience so that nobody would repeat the mistakes that we had made there. How amazing is that? And how amazing would it be if we could all get a dose of that in all the different team settings that we live in and work in, from work to home, from church to sports, wherever it is that we team. That to me is work worth doing. And I appreciate you giving me the forum to share a version of that story here.
Yeah, it's a brilliant story. I'd like to go a little deeper, but before that, like, why do you think time stands still? Like you talk about like going 1,000 miles and almost dying, but you're counting the number of screws. Like why does that happen? Or what's your theory there?
I don't have any theories. I don't know. I just know that it seems to be the case everywhere. Like I was telling that story in Phoenix, Arizona a few years ago, and afterwards, the conference organizers had this big party, and I went to it, and I was meeting all kinds of people, and this guy comes up to me, and goes, "Cujo, you're exactly right." I'm like, "Oh, well, thank you." But on what point? He's like, "Man," he said, "I had a near-death experience." He said, "Cujo, I went head-to-head with a semi-truck and lost." So he crashed head-on into this massive tractor trailer. And he said, as he hit, the windshield shattered into 1,000 different pieces. And he said, "Cujo, I saw each of those 1,000 pieces. And more remarkably, I saw the edges of each of those 1,000 pieces and all the different tiny little cracks and whatever else is as they were flying towards me." He said, "I knew which of them was going to embed in my face. I knew which of them was going to be passing by me because I saw all of it in absolute clarity and in stunning detail. And the whole thing happened so slow." I don't know why that's the case. I just can testify to the fact there's at least 2 data points that says that it is. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's probably just like this extreme focus where everything goes away and you're just locked in, to use the words my kids use. So let's go back to this debrief to win, right? Because 4 minutes for a near-death experience, and I've been in corporate for 20 years before what I did, and oftentimes it's like an hour of grilling and blaming and doing all these things. So how do you take this into the boardroom, right? Because this is a lot of the work you do, and maybe tell me like what's the process to help unlearn all the behaviors we maybe have learned all our lives.
Yeah, well, I think it starts by setting new expectations of what accountability really means. And it's not to say that accountability is devoid of punishment, consequence, and whatnot. In fact, quite the opposite. Accountability should lead to an outcome that gives us confidence that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And sometimes that outcome is, it's been a pleasure working with you. It's not going to work out any longer over here. Thank you very much for your services. So we just have to acknowledge that. But the mechanism to get there doesn't have to be full of fear. And that's a hard thing to teach because we've all been inculcated with fear, and specifically fear of failure since we were little kids. If you go study the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, she's done the research to support the fact that like fear is organic. It has been inculcated in us since we were in school. You have fear of being of asking a bad question, which leads to not asking any questions. Fear of failure, which causes you to never admit to one and own up to one, and those kinds of things, they just get reinforced throughout life. So we have to find a way, dealing with a bunch of wounded souls, ourselves included, to get past that. And it starts with the leaders' behaviors and what modeling they do, as Dr. Timothy Clark teaches us, that makes it okay for us to be vulnerable in front of one another. So we teach the imperative of being vulnerable. We teach the imperative of being positive in the midst of failure. And if you look at some of the most shining, best examples of leaders that you've ever worked for and with, probably a common characteristic is when everything fell apart, they maintained their composure. When there was a huge disaster, they sought to understand. They might have even assumed positive intent from the team in order to help the team to learn to bounce back from this thing. And maybe they even, if they had a high degree of emotional intelligence, entered into the analysis phase with childlike curiosity. We teach that failure is the best learning mechanism that a team can go through. A team actually isn't a team until it's confronted failure. So those teams that have only ever won, they came together at just the right time. The market was perfect. Everything's just been going on a steady up. And yeah, that's not a team yet, because winning does not test us. Failure does. And so learning how to fail well is really, really important. And the best teams learn that failure is the greatest thing that we can harness in order to learn effectively. And leaders of the best teams, they know that you don't lead through a failure so much as you teach and coach through it. And so there's a coaching component to this. In fact, one of my biggest challenges, biggest issues with Top Gun Maverick is that the U.S. Navy allowed Tom Cruise's character Maverick in that film to say, "I'm not a teacher." And he's wearing a Top Gun graduate patch on his arm as he says this. And I'm like, wait a second, teacher, you're one of the best teachers by virtue of having that patch the Navy has. Like, a fighter pilot's always a teacher. You got to be able to teach to be able to lead through a failure. Aside from that, the movie's exceptional. And then you got to have a framework that you can harness, that you use every single time regardless, to help you to learn through it effectively in order to come out on the back end stronger. And that is what we do when it comes to the debrief. We learn our way through all of the disruptions we face. We learn from our failures to hopefully never fail this way again, or to fail less badly the next time as we continue to learn our way through disruption. And what we'll tell you is the faster we can learn, the more confident we can be that we can navigate whatever the challenges are, and in a force-on-force environment, win ultimately, which is our whole reason for being. And that transfers anywhere.
Amazing. So companies that successfully take on this debrief to win, like, is the leader probably has to be all in on it, right? To be able to adjust their style.
That's a really big deal. And in fact, one of the things that we typically do is we try to assess coming in, can we get there with you? And it does start with the leader. And the very first leader that has ever brought me in to teach this, he convinced me that he was the right person to test this out on when he said, Cujo, last year we didn't hit our company goals. And as we got together at the end of the year to discuss this, I acknowledged I'm the reason why. And I had failed us by doing this, and I had failed us by doing this, and I had failed us by doing this, and I was going to change these things coming into the new year to help us to achieve our new goal. And I didn't even ask him any of this. He just volunteered it. But I knew after having shared that with me that his organization would thrive with Debrief to Win. We've come into places where the CEO is against it. We've come into places where somebody lower in the organizational structure said we need this desperately and maybe we can lead up. And that's a challenging environment to be in. In fact, I remember one presentation that I gave. It was a half-day workshop out west somewhere. And it was two co-CEOs of the same company, and one wanted me and the other one didn't. Okay. I'm like, oh my gosh, how's this going to go? So anyway, the one who wanted me did the introduction. And I came in and we did the workshop, and it was a 4-hour deal, and I had to run as soon as it was over with to catch my flight. And so there wasn't a lot of time for the post, but I ended up staying way too long because the CEO that didn't want me did the closing, and it was the end of their time together. So it was like the ultimate closing. What he said was, he goes, I wasn't excited about this, to be honest with you. Didn't think we needed it. He said, upon further review, I realized I am the poison to this organization that prevented us from being able to be our best. Yeah, it was a huge wow moment. He said, the only way that any of this stuff is going to work here is if I change me, and I have to start there first. He goes, and I need to, because what we're talking about here is really, really worthwhile stuff. And so there was an interesting circumstance where just kind of revealing some of the truths here unlocked the potential that was lying dormant for, in this case, a couple of decades if memory serves, and made it possible for them to go down that path. Really hard if the CEO is not on board with this. And for sure, that company had a challenge with a co-CEO that was preventing them from being able to be vulnerable openly and to learn their way through failure into a better outcome.
Amazing. So what else makes for like a high performance team? Like if you think about the transition to maybe a lack of accountability to now, hey, accountability in the right way, what other ingredients form a high performance team?
So there's a great book called The Wisdom of Teams that heavily influenced my writing of Debrief to Win. And it was written by two researchers that I found all over Harvard Business Review. That's how I came across them. John Katzenbach and Doug Smith are their names. And they spent 20 years trying to understand what makes a team. And they gave me the core definition of what a team is that I used in the book Debrief to Win. And they also defined for me and for all of us what the components are of a high performance team. And when we talk high performance, what's really interesting is they say, Katzenbach Smith do, that in the world of high performance teams, everybody on the team can do each other's job equally well. In the world of high performance teams, everybody in the team can lead the team equally effectively. And I'm paraphrasing here, but these are some of the takeaways that I have from reading that book. And you're like, whoa, hang on for just a second. You're saying that high performance doesn't just mean like performing exceptionally well. There are other characteristics, and the answer is yes. Another characteristic of a high performance team is that in that world, if one of us fails, all of us do. And it gets us into this notion of shared fate. And what I found is when I ask people what accountability is, like just off the top of the head, what is accountability? It's usually some variant of successfully accomplishing my responsibilities, which is to say, hey, even if we as a team failed, I'm okay if I did my part. High performance team says, no, it's a shared fate. I may have done an exceptional job doing my part, but because we together didn't win, that I'm also complicit. And that's a total mindset shift. Another feature of what it takes to be a high performance team is, and this is now pulling from other sources, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it stands out to me. High performance teams spend lots of time together. And we just dropped our second oldest off at the United States Air Force Academy. He's beginning his journey of following in his dad's footsteps. And since we were out in Colorado Springs, I took the remaining kids to the U.S. Olympic Center and just kind of wanted to show them, what that place is all about. It's such a great place to go. And while we were there, my wife bought me a copy of a book by the team captain for the 1980 Miracle on Ice hockey team. And one of the things that he writes about is how much time that team spent together. And they were traveling all over the place, playing all these practice games. They're on the bus, they're traveling here, they're exhausted, they're no time with their families, they're just always together. And what it led to is this sense of family, this understanding of one another. That means that it also had, blow-ups and fights and whatever else as a family would have, but they got to the point where they understood one another. And I think back to my time in a fighter squad, all the fighter squadrons that I was in. We spent so much time together, formally and informally, that I could come into a meeting with you, let's say, and I'd be like, all right, you ready to fly, man? And you'd be like, yeah, Cujo, I'm ready to fly. And I could tell based upon your facial expression and just a slight change in your tone that something massive was going on in the background. And I'm probably gonna be like, hey, dude, before you go fly, I need to talk to you about the Christmas party real quick. Hey, everybody else, you guys are cleared to go. Ron, let's go back. And then, in the privacy of my office, I'm like, dude, what's up? And you're like, nothing's up, everything's fine. I'm like, I know that that's not the case, Ron. What's really going on? And you're like, yeah, I think she's leaving me. And all of a sudden, we're not flying. You and I are spending some time together trying to figure out how to get through this really tough phase that you're in. You don't get there when you only see each other on Zoom once a week.
Yes. Yes.
Spend lots of time together. And that's really, really, really important.
Amazing. I love all those answers because there's so much work to be done in business teams, right? When you think about, what we've been through with COVID and virtual work and now the return to work, which is, it's a cause for tension. It's really helped crystallize for me, the importance of that in-person time. Well, I mean, Zoom time's good as well, but the in-person time to galvanize the team. And I think it connects me back to your answer on Cujo, where Cujo came from. It's pretty amazing. Okay, cool. I love that. This time has absolutely flown by. Two last things. So for any of my listeners, if you know Curtis Joseph, the former Toronto hockey player, we need to get these two Cujos together. They're both remarkable. And the second Cujo, first of all, I want to thank you, but want to say, is there anything else you'd like to leave with my audience?
Yeah, listen, a couple of quick things. Number one, I'm a big fan of reading. I mean, shameless plug for your book, outstanding reading right over here. Another thing that I would recommend, only because you're catching me here with part of my library behind me, is this one, Excellence Wins by Horst Schultz, co-founder of Ritz-Carlton. And I think it's must reading for anybody that's in the business space. It's so important what he's talking about the pursuit of excellence and why companies that pursue it the way that they did really stand head and shoulders above of all others. Another one is a quote that I was taught. I'm inspired because my son is now at the Air Force Academy. One of the things that he's learning is a bunch of knowledge in a book called Contrails. He has to absorb all of the stuff that's in here and spout it back at a moment's notice. One of the quotes that I learned when I was doing the same thing in the summer of 1991 was one that has influenced me ever since. And the quote goes like this: "Don't tell your people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity." And interestingly, that comes to us from General George S. Patton Jr. And you wouldn't expect that probably in World War II era leadership, but he was basically saying there's so much potential out there. Don't micromanage it. Give people the space to go out there and to do the amazing things that they're capable of. And I think that's some good leadership advice. And so, yeah.
Amazing. Well, Cujo, thank you so much. It's such a gift to have you on my podcast, and I really, really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It is my gift, my joy to be here. And to everybody that's listening to this, thank you so much for giving us the gift of your time today.